Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see you. We're going to get straight into it because there's quite a lot of material to get through today. But I just want to say that if you have any questions, I think it's good to deal with the questions in context. So you should feel okay to ask them. If you don't want to interrupt me or something like that, just type the questions in the chat and I will have Alexis interrupt me or somebody like that, and I will try and keep an eye on the chat window. But I definitely think this works better when there's a little bit of a conversation going on. And we have a few things to talk about. So let me then start right away with what we're going to talk about. What we're going to talk about today. We have a sort of an introduction where I'm going to talk about our lens as product managers. We perhaps look at artificial intelligence as AI a little bit differently to how other people might look at it. And I really want to focus today on AI for product managers. So we're not going to talk about AI generally. We're just going to focus on AI for product managers. And we're going to have a little discussion of what is a generative model to the extent that you need to understand that, which I think you do, and look at generative AI and a large language model from, again, the lens of a product manager. Then answer the questions of what coherent tool set can I use right now? I'm a product manager. What can I do right now to take advantage of AI in the best possible way? How can I use these tools to be productive? Like what's the way that I can use them to move forward? And how can I think about or perhaps look at the future? What are some predictions that we've got coming up for perhaps for 2026 and for 2027? So that's what we've got today. We've got sort of 5 chapters, if you like. Each chapter, if you want to think of it like that, has a sort of a chapter heading of this biathlete, AI-generated biathlete skier. So we're going to start off with looking at the introduction and our product manager lens. And I'm going to make 3 notes about that. But the first one that I want to say is that there's sort of 2 aspects to AI in product management. There's the process you do, your personal productivity of being a good. And then there's the process you manage. You manage a process, and that process might be managing AI products or managing the development of AI products. We are going to focus on the first of those, the process that you do. And that applies to any product manager. You don't have to be an AI product manager. We are, in fact, not going to look at managing AI products. We're going to look at how do we, as product managers, take advantage of AI to do our jobs better. So that's the scene, if you like, for today. So the 3 points I want to make is number 1, which is, I guess, we can think of that as the good news, or I guess maybe the bad news, or I guess I don't know. But you need to change the way you work, right? That is the fundamental truth of AI. And if we look at the technology adoption life cycle, I hope most of you are familiar with this. This came up in 1956. This was developed, and then in 1991, Geoffrey Moore came up with this idea of the chasm and crossing the chasm. So that's the sort of context of this. And the technology adoption life cycle is what we're going to look at as we think about AI. I hope many of you are familiar with this. If you do want to tell me in the chat, if you want to tell me if you are familiar with this. And also, while I'm here, if you think I'm talking too fast or too slowly, please let me know in the chat and I will moderate appropriately. Okay, so for those of you, since we've got one person, Lohit, thank you. So the innovators are really the very tip of the curve. You sort of say, hey, I've got this new thing, and they're all over it. The early adopters are the people who take on the technology that exists. It's not bleeding edge, but it's early. The early majority and the late majority are the bulk of people. These are standard deviations. So each one of those is 34% of the population. So that's 70% of the population. And then the laggards are the people who don't really want to adopt technology. And we know as product managers that we speak to these communities very differently. If you're a product manager and you're talking to an innovator, you might say, I'm going to completely change the way you work. But if you talk to somebody in the early majority, you wouldn't say that because that would be terrifying to them. You might use words like efficiency or economy, or I'm going to improve your business processes. And then if you're talking to a laggard, you might not use that at all. In fact, you would use words where the technology is not in a form that is visible. So a great example of a technology that perhaps in the laggard area is your microcontrollers. So microcontrollers came out in the 1990s, these little computerified things, and people use them in lots of ways, but a laggard might only use them, for example, in their car, right? They don't interface with these microcontrollers. The car controls are still the same, but nevertheless, they are used. I mean, I drive a Honda, and the gears are mapped artificially through a microcontroller, right? But the interface for me is still the same. So that's the technology adoption lifecycle, and how we have to think about, as product managers, we speak differently to different parts when our customers are in different parts of this product lifecycle, the technology adoption lifecycle. So let's think about sort of what does that mean, right? That sort of, if we think of it as like the innovators are create change. I love change, okay? Early majority is like, I'm okay to have change. You know, it's not, maybe not what I pick. Late majority tend to dislike change, and the laggards just won't change. So if we think about where AI has penetrated, AI has been around for a few years, and the penetration of a new technology into the life cycle starts on the left-hand side with the innovators adopting it and moves through across. So it sort of takes on more and more and more people. It actually slows down a little bit as it moves, right? So it's probably, I would guess that AI is somewhere around here, right? The early majority are using it. I don't think the late majority are quite there yet, but the early majority are using it. The early adopters are certainly using it, and say maybe most of the early majority are having at it. So if we think about that, think about using AI now. How do we use it? We're not using it as innovators. We're using it as to get business value out of it. And just by the way, I feel that for the laggards, if you're not using AI, pretty soon you're a dinosaur. And the mammals are coming. They are going to coming and they are going to eat your lunch. So you should be using AI. So can I get some indication in the chat, please? Like if you use AI, I would say as a chat window, maybe you work through AI as a chat. Just say chat in the chat window. And if you use something else, then let me know what else you're using, because this gives me an idea. It helps me decide where to emphasize. So if you can just spend a little moment, please go to the chat window and tell me how you're using it. Okay, use Claude. I guess that's Claude Desktop, Chat, Perplexity. That's great. Chat 90%. Great. So you're familiar with chat. That's fantastic. So that's exactly what I was thinking. The goal here is you're familiar with it chatting. Oh, co-work. That's cool. We're going to take you to tools beyond chat. Okay. Chat, it turns out, is I mean, it's nice and easy, but actually from a point of view of getting value out of AI, it's actually a terrible way to get value out of AI. I mean, it's not nothing. So I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. You absolutely should. I use it all the time. But you can do more. So let's think about this. And I want to talk now briefly, set the stage about where we are with AI. And that is that most people dramatically underestimate what AI can do right now. And the focus of today is going to be on AI as it exists today. We're not looking at ahead. We're not looking at what AI can do. We are focusing only on capabilities that exist in AI right now. And so we're not talking about AI will be amazing someday. I personally believe AI is amazing right now. It can give almost anyone the capabilities of a mid-level software engineer, a senior marketing executive, data analyst, a senior business analyst. The bottleneck isn't the AI. The bottleneck, and there is a very severe bottleneck, is how we think about structuring our work and how we interface with AI. If we're going to continue structuring our work the same way that we've always been structuring our work, we're going to find AI frustrating to use. And we're going to say, oh, I don't know, it doesn't work. And this is characteristic. In fact, it's one of the things that makes me think that just the beginning of the late majority are starting to use AI right now, because we're starting to see people complaining about it. And they're saying, oh, it's terrible. It doesn't do this. It doesn't do that. Oh, it's a total. Well, these are people who won't change or who don't want to change. And AI is forcing a change upon them. So they're complaining about it. That's kind of how this goes, right? We have to focus on being prepared to change. If you're not going to change the way you work, you are not going to get the most value out of AI. That's the deal. Right? So knowledge work, if we think of it, knowledge work has shifted in the last 2 years, has shifted 100 times. So I looked at this. There's a benchmark called SWE Bench Verified. Now, it doesn't really matter what that is, but if you're curious, it's a whole lot of trouble tickets, and they individually curated. They're verified by individuals. I think there are 400 tickets in the data set, and they're not easy. I mean, I have a CS degree. I come from a CS background, and it would take me hours, if not a day, to solve each one of these. Currently, the top performing AI model is solving here under 80% of these tickets. That is mid-level software engineer stuff. Mid-level software engineer stuff. Does anyone want to take a guess what percentage of these tickets AI was able to solve just over 2 years ago? Anyone? %10. Good. First of all, good for 2 reasons. One, 20% good. People, if you're a product manager, product managers are thought leaders. You've got to be prepared to say what you think. Even if you're wrong, it's okay to be wrong, right? Nothing wrong with being wrong. We're wrong all the time. But you've got to be prepared to say what you think. You are here, you're in your business to provide thought leadership. Okay? 10%, 20%, that's all very good guesses. Very, very good guesses. It turns out that the number was 0.4%. 0.4%, in other words, like one of these was solvable by AI 2.25 years ago. That tells you how far AI has come in an area which AI has chosen to focus, which is code and fixing errors. It's an area that AI has got a lot of effort put into it, right? So it's absolutely dramatically increased, more than 100 times. Right? In fact, just compared to 8 months ago, it was at 65%. And now it's at a hair under 80%. So this is how AI, when AI has effort placed into a particular problem domain, this is how we should expect things to improve. And we will see that at the moment, effort is being put into the problem domain of code, writing code and using code. But over the last 6 months or so, there's absolutely been a massive increase into the problem domains that AI is being put into. And we should expect similar increases in those industries as those problems are solved in detail. Right? So as a result of this, there is a tsunami bearing down on the economy. Very popular phrase. Absolutely, absolutely true. Leveraging AI is one of the highest return on investment skills that you can learn today. Absolutely one of the highest return on investment skills. But there are a couple of things that you have to remember. AI is not 100% of one person. It is 80% of 100 people. And that means that if you're using AI, AI is not going to come in. I've had this conversation with a couple of business leaders before. They say, hey, I've implemented a couple of agents. Who can I fire? The answer is nobody, because AI doesn't replace 100% of one person, even though that's easy to understand. That's not what happens. It replaces 80% of 100 people. And soon it will be 95% of 100 people. AI is a force multiplier. It is not a force replacer. You still have to have people. And in fact, I think as product managers, we are very, very well placed to thrive in the AI economy, perhaps much more so than project managers and other skills. And we will see what it takes to thrive over the course of the next 45 minutes to an hour. So the third thing that I want to say, I said I had 3 things to say for the introduction. The third thing I want to say is thought leadership matters. Product managers are still, as always, in charge of the why. That is your job. It's not the what, it's not the how, it's the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? And the problem facing people using AI is in a world where you can do anything, knowing what you should be doing matters more. We looked at anybody can be a mid-level software engineer. Anybody can be a decent developer. Well, if anybody can be those things, why aren't you those things? Right? Why, if anybody can do them? Well, the answer is because maybe you should be, maybe you shouldn't be. You have to decide for yourself, what should you be doing? Because a lot of people can do a lot more skills. And we are going to be moving to a world where product managers are going to be expected to do more things. So management becomes more important. Management, functions of management, planning, organizing, motivating people, and controlling processes. Those are the functions of management. They become even more important because we have to make sure that in a world where people can do whatever they want, are they contributing to the business? Are they doing what they want? So now I just want to take a little break then quickly and go and look at some comments about AI. So this comes from Slashdot. Slashdot's a pretty popular website for the tech community. And it comes from, I guess, 2 months ago, right? End of December. It says AI is quickly becoming a requirement, with 41% of all active job postings representing AI roles or requiring AI skills. So this economist says, if you have AI skills, there are lots of jobs, right? But if you don't, I think you're going to feel like you've been hit by a dump truck. I think that is true. I think absolutely, and it is true. If you are using AI, you're going to be successful and thrive if you use it correctly. And if you're not, you are sort of going to kind of just muddle along, and eventually you're going to muddle yourself out of a job. Yeah? So how do companies then leverage AI? We know we're going to focus today on individuals, on people, on product managers, but I want to briefly touch on how companies are going to leverage AI. The first thing is that companies seek differentiated value. That's what companies want, right? They want differentiated value that they can realize. And if everybody's using AI, using ChatGPT, chat interface, or Claude as a chat interface is not a differentiator. It's just what they have to do. Their new table stakes, and table stakes have been set that that's what you need to do, but that's not going to differentiate from the competition, and it's not going to provide you with, as a business, a sustainable competitive advantage. So when we say that, we say there's no moat, right? There's nothing to separate you, to defend you from the competition. And what firms face now is this challenge of absorptive capacity. So absorptive capacity is a term from international relations. It's a firm's ability to recognize the value of information, to assimilate it, and to apply it to commercial ends. And that's exactly the same as actually for an individual, right? The one measure, if you like, of intelligence of a human is your ability to take on new information and integrate it into your worldview. Right? That's sort of one way of thinking of intelligence, right? People who are intelligent can take in new information quickly, and they can incorporate it into the way they function very quickly. So integrating AI into each firm's business context is the key to success. And if we think of ourselves as product managers as sort of like one-person businesses, that's what we have to do as well. We have to integrate AI into our context. And this is because AI as a technology is kind of an interesting technology. It's what's called situated. It works best when it is very close to the problem being solved. So we want to get AI. AI can be the sort of general idea, but actually doesn't necessarily work best as a general idea. It works when it is close to the problem being solved. And we will see some benefits and disadvantages of that and how we overcome those disadvantages. Because it turns out that integrating an AI into a business context is kind of more work than it sounds, right? It's not a trivial amount of work. And that's actually one of the reasons why I think we're going to be a little bit of time before we start seeing big value for AI. I think most people are using AI, even if they say they're not. And what we're going to see, we're not quite at the getting the value back point yet, but we are at the point where you have to get involved. So things we are not discussing today. We're not going to discuss command line AI usage. Very interesting. Outside of the scope of this. We're not going to discuss prompting, also very important, but we're not going to discuss it right now. We're also not going to discuss this, like the business of AI and funding of companies and artificial general intelligence and whether companies are going to make a profit or any of that. I agree, those are all interesting topics. We're not talking about them. We're focusing on AI for product managers. So now let's take a look. I want to very briefly explain, because I don't think people understand this often, why AI is so important, and in particular, why AI has already reached the point where some of the questions in the last slide actually don't matter. So I'm going to take a little bit of a sidebar for 10 minutes to talk about a tiny bit of very, very light theory. So the first one is, if I ask somebody to describe your appearance, describe your appearance. Use a couple of descriptive terms, right? I can describe myself. Right? I can use myself. I can say I'm 6'1" and I wear glasses, right? When you describe your appearance, you might say I'm tall, or you might say I have blonde hair, or I have brown hair, or I have, like, I don't know, green eyes, or whatever it is. You don't describe everything about yourself. Clearly, the person you're talking to knows a lot of things that you don't need to mention. They're sort of the default state of play. I don't know, I have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a nose, right? I don't mention that in my description of myself. Now, I guess if I wanted to be really detailed, I could send them a photograph, I suppose. I can say, send a photo and say, here's a photo of me, right? This is how I'm going to describe myself. I'm going to answer the question with a photograph. But it turns out you can be much more informationally efficient, if you like. With no more than 10 or 15 statements, you can probably describe yourself uniquely in the world. So if I wanted to describe myself, I could say, I teach at Cornell. I guess whatever it is, 73 inches tall. And, I can talk about race, ethnicity, hair color, number of fingers I have, those kinds of things, right? You can describe yourself with 10 or 15 statements uniquely. And that is a much more compressed form of data than sending a photo. And this gives us clues that companies that are interested in compressing data are also interested in AI, which tells you why Google got into AI, because they do search, right? So now let's look at this through the lens of maybe a classification problem of like cookie tins, right? How much data do you need to describe a cylinder shape? Anyone know? Anyone tell me? Like, what data do you need to describe the shape of a cylinder? Absolutely. Hussein said R and H, which is radius or diameter, I guess, and the height. Absolutely. Radius and height, right? Okay, absolutely. Yeah, you need to describe those two things, right? With just 2 data points, height and diameter or radius, you can describe a cookie tin. Now, so we can convert every image that we have, right? We have these images of these gray cookie tins or cylinders, right? We can describe every image we want with just these 2 pieces of information, just these 2 data points, right? And we can plot these features, maybe the x-axis is the radius or the y-axis is the height or something like that. And we can plot those in 2D space. And in doing so, we have converted a 3-dimensional representation, a cylinder or a cookie tin, into a 2-dimensional representation, a lower dimensional representation. This, in this case, 2-dimensional representation is called the latent space, right? It is a vector space, if you know what that is, and it is the space where we store this information. But there's some important things to remember about that. The first is that we have lost information. Sure, we described it with only 2 numbers. That was great. That was 2 numbers, but maybe we lost important information, like what it's made of. Maybe we lost information about what its color. That information is gone. It is lost. We have chosen to represent it with these 2 numbers. And just in the same way, when you train a large language model, you are choosing a set of dimensions, and you are knowingly and willingly giving up. You're losing other information. You're not choosing to store everything, right? So it's a low dimensional representation that captures underlying structure and variations in the original high dimensional space. That's very important. So we've got a low dimensional way of storing all these other things. But we have to remember, sometimes if you're going to ask me about those things that I haven't stored, I'm going to make up stuff that I don't know about, right? So that's called, yeah, absolutely, Hollywood, right? That's called a hallucination, right? I make up something because I didn't store that information, but you're asking me about it, right? Now, we've chosen 2 dimensions, two parameters, if you like, to use. Most modern high-end large language models don't use 2 dimensions. They use somewhere around 100 to 300 billion dimensions, which obviously is a lot more. But nevertheless, the point remains, right? So large language models are machines which organize concepts. Large language models are machines which create and process these latent space representations. LLMs create latent space representations. This is the breakthrough of artificial intelligence. The rest barely matters. This is why artificial intelligence is important. It's got nothing to do with anything else. This on its own is enough to completely transform everything. So why is that the case? Well, let's take a look at that. Number one, any concept can be represented as a vector, right? Just trust me on that. You can Google concepts are probably vectors, a very famous paper. We're just going to say that any concept can be represented as a vector, which means if you have an appropriate latent space, you can represent that concept in the space. Now, of course, the things you choose as your axes really matters. And that's a whole nother discussion. But you can create concepts, or sorry, you can have concepts and you can put them into this set of axes. And when you do that, it turns out that the meaning of these concepts is related to how far apart they are physically in the space. So you can use our good buddy Pythagoras to work out how far apart concepts are. Concepts that are close in physical space, in this multidimensional space, are also close conceptually. And things that are far apart are also far apart conceptually. That is the key understanding of latent spaces. We're not going to go into why that's the case. But that is the most important understanding. We can use a measure of physical distance to represent conceptual distance, which means if we want to find concepts that are similar to another concept, we just have to look physically around it, and we will find concepts that are similar. Okay? This is world-changing. AI is changing the world right now. Because of this, latent spaces allow us to push our culture, everything that's been written, everything that's been spoken, all the numbers, into a digital form. And this is the key. The key isn't that AI is smart. The key is that it's digital. It doesn't matter if AI doesn't get any smarter than it is right now. From a cultural point of view, it's already smart enough. And that's very important because if we look, there's another very famous paper cited in the link below. It turns out that people who are able to write, when they speak differently to people who are not able to write. That was a very foundational proof. People who are numerate, who know numbers well, write and speak very differently to people who don't understand numbers. Well, maybe AI with these latent spaces is another stack on top of this. And it turns out that how you interact with things matters based on whether you're numerate or not. So I don't have a little story time. When I was younger and I used to go to the bank, I used to take a little book. You get this little bank book that you would take, and you would trot along to the bank, and you'd go to the teller, and you'd hand them the book, and you'd say, I want some money, and they'd give you the money, and then you'd take the money, and they'd write in the little book, and they'd give you the book back, and off you'd go, right? Well, if you couldn't write, if you were illiterate, that was great. You just walked to a teller, and you got your money, and you walked out. You didn't have to know how to read and write. But then ATMs came along in the 1980s, late 1980s. And suddenly, if you were illiterate, you couldn't bank. I mean, sure, you could go to the tellers. They still existed. But like nowadays, not really so much. I mean, I bank with Chase. I don't even have a branch in my city. I don't care. I do it all online. So if you're illiterate, you've been excluded from banking. Well, I think it turns out that with this new layer on our stack, if you're bad at AI, you are going to be excluded from parts of the economy. So it pays to be decent at AI. Now, I think this is going to have major cultural consequences we're not going to talk about today, but nevertheless. So generative AI uses these latent spaces. So we can create information that's not part of our training data by looking physically around it. That's the generative part. And we can create new concepts, but much more importantly, we can create new concept connections. Okay? That's what a large language model is. A transformer, which is something you've probably heard of, is a tool. It is a software tool which makes large language models mathematically tractable. It uses something called self-attention, which we're not going to talk about. And this makes it possible to learn from these enormous amounts of information that are coming in. The challenge we face with large language models are that they are probabilistic. when you get an answer, if you ask the same question of AI, even the same AI twice, you will get a different answer because they're probabilistic. They don't give certainty. They give probabilistic answers based actually largely on a thing called the temperature. But that's not great. If you're a business, like probabilistic often isn't what you want, right? Probabilistic's not cool, right? I don't want to get like have an AI create an invoice and then the next day it creates a different invoice, right? That's not what we want. We don't want different invoices for the same data, right? We want the same invoice. We want certainty. So the question is, how do we constrain these probabilistic machines to do what we want? So they're just probabilistic enough, but just deterministic enough. And the answer is we use workflows to do it. That's how we do it. So we're going to talk about workflows today. Yeah? But as product managers, one of the most important things we can say is that large language models let you move up and down the abstraction stack. So I would also say that it doesn't necessarily be easy to do this, but as product managers, one of the most important skills for the next generation of product managers up and coming is the ability to move easily between different layers of abstraction. To talk one day about metrics, to talk the next day about execution, and to talk the next day about road mapping, and to talk the next day about vision. You know that if you've been in a workplace, if you've been a manager, that when you talk to your team, you don't use the same words that you use when you talk to your boss, right? Or your boss's boss. When you talk to your team, you might talk about this is the metrics we have to cover. This is where we're tracking. This is what we're doing on our tasks. But when you talk to maybe your boss's boss, you want to link those things to vision, to strategy. This is how my team is realizing your vision of where this company needs to go. Right? You talk very differently to different layers of business, and you do this by moving up and down this abstraction stack. One of the key skills of product managers is the ability to do this fluently and fluidly, to easily move up and down the abstraction stack. LLMs help you do this, but they also are going to require you to do this in order to be successful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about workflows. Maybe 10 minutes of workflows. The most powerful algorithm in the history of anything, but certainly in the history of computer science, is divide and conquer. Take the problem, break it down into smaller pieces until each piece is trivial, and then do that piece. And this is exactly how computers, computers used to work, certainly, and computers for the most part work now, right? If you've got a single core machine, it's doing one thing at a time. Your CPU is doing one thing at a time, and it's breaking the problem down into parts to do those one thing at a time. And divide and conquer, putting things into chains of activities where you have to do the one step, then do the next step, then do the next step. That is nice and deterministic. That's fantastic. Because right now, we've got these probabilistic tools that we need to make more deterministic so they work for us. And this is one of the tools we're going to talk about today of the three. So 2 workflow tools. There's a visual tool called N8N. There are lots of these visual tools, and we'll talk about why the particular visual tool you use matters probably less than you think. But I'm going to be talking about this tool called N8N, which happens to be currently the most popular visual tool. My assumption is tools will change. The workflows and the way we think about things won't change. And therefore, it's worth learning this tool. And there's sort of these portable workflow packages, which we call skills, right? Called skills. And ChatGPT has the same idea as skills. So let's talk about workflow tools. A workflow is a set of repeatable actions that transforms and transfers data from one form to another. That's what a workflow is, right? It's these set of steps. And as product managers, workflows are super useful to us and super important. That's what we do most of our days. We execute workflows, whether or not we think of them as workflows or not. We execute workflows. And here's some other definitions from IBM and from Box.com. And workflows consist of nodes. They consist of little activities you do, and they consist of sort of things that joining them. You go from one activity to the next. And this is very easy to display as a visual system. And we will talk in a second about why that's so important. And these nodes, these little activities, are executed sequentially. They go through the data and they churn through the data. And they often need sort of additional information in order to be able to do them, little credentials and stuff like that. You've got to do all that stuff, and I get that. And you can represent these workflows as text, right, as text files, and we will use this word JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, as a way of saying text, right? And there's a one-on-one correspondence between these little workflows and tables, so we can put them in a database. That's great, because boy, we know how to use databases nowadays. So let's take a look at a simple example, a very simple example. And it turns out that this simple example is fine because most workflows are 5 steps or fewer. Yes, it's true that you get these long, complicated workflows, but the reality is businesses like small tasks done with absolute certainty much more than they like large, complicated tasks done kind of crappily and only working part of the time. So the moral of today as a product manager is start small. And in this particular case, here's a workflow. It's a workflow I use all the time. What it does is it checks my students, and it goes and checks if my students haven't logged into Canvas. And if they haven't logged into Canvas for a week, it sends me an email with their grade. So I can see if I have any students that are struggling. You know, if they haven't logged in, I want to see their grade. If their grade's 99, I don't care if they haven't logged in. If their grade's like 50, I do. Super simple workflow, saves me a ton of time. Okay. This workflow consists of a couple of things. Consists of a trigger, a start point. All workflows start with start points. And it consists of some filtering, these blocks that do some stuff, right? And it consists of some actions. N8N has thousands of actions that you can do. And you create these workflows by drawing them on a canvas. And so they have the structure. Has anyone heard of ETL, extract, transform, and load? This is the same thing all over again in a nice new package with a shiny bow on top, right? We have a start, we fetch some data, we do some stuff to the data, and we take an action. That's a workflow. And as anyone who's used Excel can tell you, visual systems are fantastic for visualization, of course, and for simple tasks. And they are very good communication tools. And that's actually one of the main reasons I want you to learn to use these workflows. Isn't because they're the most powerful way of solving the problem. It actually turns out they're not. But they're powerful enough, and they're really good communication tools. Just like if you are doing some complicated data analysis, you might not do it in Excel. Because it turns out if you're using more than like 100,000, 200,000 rows, Excel kind of barfs, right? But if you're presenting the data to your boss, you may well choose to use Excel because your boss is familiar with Excel. And it's really easy to see. Well, that's great. It's the same way with these workflows. They are very good for collaboration. They're drawings and pictures. And remember, product managers are at their heart communicators. Product management is a communications job. So having communication be first and foremost is the correct way, the correct lens to look at these things through. Now, it turns out they have some other disadvantages. As anyone who's used Excel can tell you, Excel's really hard to debug. It gets complicated, and then it gets so complicated you can't use it anymore. And it's got some other problems, right? It doesn't really handle cycles, and it's kind of non-scalable and all these things. But you know what? That doesn't matter. It's still incredibly powerful, and you should still use it. It's a matter of right-sizing the tool. It's very easy to learn. I strongly recommend you learn it. And the reason I recommend you learn it is, first of all, it's super powerful to help you do your job, but also because many product managers, they start with a workflow. They've got this workflow tool in the front of it, and they think, well, what should I automate? And they have no idea. They have no idea what to automate. That's very normal. If you feel that way, don't feel that that's unusual. Don't feel like, oh, I'm somehow like, I'm not doing it right. That's very normal to have that. And what I want you to do is to go through the process of starting to change the way you think. Start thinking about, how do I use workflows? And you're going to have to think differently. I get that. Totally agree. That's the premise of our discussion today. Okay? Because once you start thinking of things in workflows, everything shows up as having a component of workflows. Yeah. So now people have used workflows before. I just want to quickly talk very briefly about something, which is what about agentic workflows? Okay. So an agentic workflow is a slightly different way of approaching the workflow problem. You tell the system the outcome and the system figures out the steps to do it. Okay. And it's super cool. Actually, you should totally learn it. But you should first learn N8N workflows because they teach you the way of changing your thinking. And remember, what I don't want you to do is to start using AI, where AI basically becomes a sort of like this high priest that hands down the wisdom from above. You don't understand how it got there. You don't understand what it did. It just did some woo-woo, and boy, ain't that amazing. But some days it doesn't do something amazing, and then you're completely stuck. I want you to start thinking through these steps of doing smaller steps and thinking of workflows. How do I constrain this stochastic nature, this random nature of AI, and constrain the probabilisticness into these deterministic workflows? So that's the first tool. I think you should learn workflows, and you should learn N8N. Okay, next we're going to talk about the next skill I think you should have. Okay, how are we doing for time? We're okay. Okay, skills. So skills are things that are a thing they call skills. We're not talking about just any old skill. We're talking about a thing called a term of art. Anthropic or Claude has this idea of skills. Okay? Skills are what allows AI to specialize. They enable specialization. They're these sort of knowledge guides for Claude. They change how Claude accesses information and allow you to give standard operating procedures to Claude instead of these kind of workflow step-by-step instructions. You tell Claude when to use them and what to do with them. And that allows you to execute things, to have Claude do things for you. And the same is true of ChatGPT, of any of the others. They're perplexed, they're all the same. Okay. So the question is, well, why don't we just tell Claude what we want? Because AI systems have what's called a context window. Everything you tell AI gets used to generate the next response. Now, we don't have time today to go into context windows, but it turns out that context windows get big really quickly, and they get all this information that is irrelevant to the task, and that's very distracting for the AI, just like it would be distracting for a human. So we need to tell Claude what's important. But more importantly, we have to avoid telling Claude what isn't important. That's just as big a deal. And to do that, we use these things called skills. They allow us to do what's called managing the context window. They allow us to constrain what we're telling Claude, so Claude focuses on what's important. You should learn to make skills. So how do you create a skill? You ask Claude, because it's got a skill that creates skills. Isn't that awesome? So you can create skills with Claude, and you should think about, what do you do as a product manager? Maybe you have an evaluation, like an end user evaluation. Something you have to do. Now, it depends on your job. It depends on what you do as a product manager. There are lots of different kinds of product managers. But you should think of the tasks you do, and you should get Claude or ChatGPT to help you create skills. I think that it's a thing well worth doing. Now, there's another kind of context management tool called an agents file. I'm not talking about that today. It turns out I don't think we've got time. I really want to end in the next 5 minutes. But you should also think about that. And that is a set of default instructions that you give your AI that it reads every single time. So you want to give it some default instructions. And the goal of this exercise, the goal of creating skills, the goal of creating workflows, the goal of creating your agents file, agents.md file, is so that you stop having Claude operate in a default way and start having Claude operate in a way that is customized to the problems that you have to solve. Because remember, for businesses, default AI use is not a competitive advantage. It's not a moat. Just like for us individuals as product managers, if we want to do our jobs, default AI is not good enough. It's not going to separate us from the competition. We have to teach the AI to do what we want it to do. And these are the tools we use to do that. Yeah. So finally, I want to talk. For a lot of PMs, it's worth learning a build tool. There are lots of these. Lovable, I see Lovable just got a whole lot more money. Base 44, Vercel, they're all kind of okay. They're all really good tools. Find one that works the way you do and just learn it. If you're into producing software, if you're not into producing software or end user stuff or user interfaces, you don't need to do this. Okay? I mean, I personally think that a lot of these tools are going to sort of be absorbed into the AI leaders, Google and Anthropic, which they already are being done, or they're going to vanish away, but it's still worth learning them. But I think sort of learn them second, if you like. First learn skills, first learn workflows, then learn a tool like this, because it will help you understand how these tools work. So now I want to briefly talk about agents. I'm sure you've heard this word, agents. Okay. Agents solve a lot of limitations of large language models, right? Large language models can't take action. They struggle to keep track of, we just talked about it, how they struggle to keep track of what's important. Agents are software systems that perceive their environments, and make decisions to take action. They perceive an environment and make decisions to take action. That's my definition. There are tons of definitions out there, and it turns out they change constantly. But I think this is a good one to use. Okay, you use agents to execute specific tasks. Now, again, we know they're stochastic. We know large language models won't produce the same result, but that's okay for the cases. So sometimes having that is okay. We're not going to go into how to constrain that. It can be done. So remember, you use tools like N8N because they are powerful communication tools. They are simple to understand and they're easy to get started. We use tools like agents.md, and we use tools where we constrain and give instructions, standard operating procedures to the AI, so the AI can start learning to work like we work. So I want to talk very briefly about some predictions and then wrap up with maybe just 2 more slides. So first of all, I think if you're a product manager, AI skills are table stakes. If you don't like agents, using agents markdown file, and you don't want to use skills, using AI is going to be frustrating to you. It's going to like annoy you because it's never going to do exactly what you want. The next thing I would say is, as a product manager, you're in the thought leadership business. Thought leadership matters now more than ever. You need to protect and get and build your reputation for thought leadership. You're a thought leader. That's what product managers do. And that means sometimes being wrong, and that's okay. Product managers, I think, also are going to be expected to do much more of the actual work. You're not just somebody who's got no reports, who's moving things around. Now you've got somebody who's got no reports who actually has to do stuff. You still don't get reports. So you have to be able to use these tools to create prototypes or to instantiate ideas just at the prototype level, just at the proof of concept level, without a design team, without a build team. I think there's going to be an increased expectation that you not only have to be able to move up and down this abstraction stack, but you're going to have to execute at different levels of the abstraction stack. So you're going to some days you'll be an individual contributor. Some days you'll be behaving like a manager. And you might think that is bad, but actually that's good. That's good for you as a product manager because, one, it's hard. So as you learn to do it, like, well, how do you get paid nice, lots of money? Do hard things, right? It's not easy for everybody to do this. Do things which are difficult and get good at this. And you will, first of all, have a job for all eternity. Like turning problems into simple, understandable little bits has always been popular and will continue to be popular and well paid as long as humans exist. So product managers need to be comfortable moving around this level of abstraction. It can be slightly annoying to do, so you have to focus on it. I also want to touch very briefly on just some like random ideas. What can AI do for you right now? You can do a workflow to watch your competitors. You can do a workflow to keep track of clients. You can do a workflow to make any small, simple task easier. And the goal is remove yourself out of the process, because we talked about how AI isn't the bottleneck. The interface between humans and AI is the bottleneck. So start small, very small, even if it's 1 or 2 steps. That's okay. Start small. And remember, rule of business 101. know your core value proposition. Do not outsource your core value proposition, okay? Because you'll find yourself without a job, okay? Figure out what it is that is your core value proposition and do that thing. And probably for you, that means interfacing with clients. That means interfacing with teams. That means, again, product managers are at their heart communicators. Don't get the AI to do the communication for you. Get the AI to do the boring stuff so that you can do the communication. Don't outsource your core value proposition. It just isn't smart, right? Okay. So some take-home lessons. Finally, just before we wrap up. Number one, you've got to change the way you work. Number two, you need to start using AI tools. You can use the tools I suggested. You can use other tools. It doesn't matter. Tools change the way you think. You need to use the tools and you need to change the way you think. If you don't change how you think, AI is going to frustrate the heck out of you because it's not going to do what you want and it's not going to work the way you want. And that's going to be annoying to you. And we will hear lots of people in the next months complaining about how AI, how terrible it is and how it doesn't work. Yeah, because they're not prepared to change. Okay. Most importantly, using AI builds on itself. You start slow and you sort of like, why is that? That's just like so slow. It's not working for me. It's really annoying. I get that. That's kind of how AI works. It's kind of how any new thing works, right? You didn't start reading War and Peace as your first book. You read like, I don't know, Pooh Bear or something like that, right? You started reading some simple stuff, okay? You didn't start doing calculus or linear algebra first. You started doing, I don't know, 1 + 1 in a world where there was already a calculator in your pocket that could do 1 + 1. So why the hell would you learn 1 + 1? Well, so that you can learn the other stuff. Okay. You need to understand that you are starting small and you push through and you build on itself as you customize your AI to work for you. As you customize the tools you use, it starts becoming a force multiplier. And eventually, due to exponential growth, it becomes incredibly powerful. But don't stop when you do it for like a month and you don't see any progress. That's how exponential growth works. Okay. Finally, large language models alone are useful, but they're not as productive as they might be. Customize them. Agents.md, Claude.md, using skills, constrain uncertainty with workflows. Use these tools so that AI works for you. Okay. That's the end. That's all I've got. I'm happy to take any questions, whatever you like. And thank you very much for listening. Is anyone still here? They all checked out and having lunch.
Any questions oh, I see a question from Lohi. Can you explain how important do guardrails become as we start using agents and workflows? Are there any resources for the same, please?
So yes, guardrails are important. So guardrails are the way of constraining, preventing AI from doing things that you don't want it to do. I think they are very important. When you're doing sort of personal kind of workflows, they're less important. When you start interfacing with business systems and having automatic actions be taken, they're much more important. So I think that's a good question. A mechanism that I find works well is to have two AIs running, and the one AI is acting as a guardrail for the other AI. So you create a skill, which is sort of like a guardrail skill, and you tell it, find problems with this, right? It's called an adversarial approach. So you have the one AI act as the guardrail for the other AI. And we don't really have time to go into that too much, but I think it's a very good question. I think guardrails are very important. So thank you for asking. And you can train an AI and use one AI to be the guardrails. There are more complicated answers, but that's a good place to start.
Great. Thank you so much for your question, Lohith. Are there any other questions? You can also feel free to unmute yourself as well.
I have a question.
Sure, go for it.
Thank you, Professor Swart, for the presentation. I just had a question about like how yesterday it was sort of announced that Block reshaped their workforce or like cut 40% of their workforce because the CEO believes that a lot of the jobs can be done by AI. So beyond like the technical expertise, like, you know, learning how to use N8N or using like AI workflows or even like developing communication skills, How do you still like stay valuable if companies have started to believe that AI can replace your job?
That's a great question. First of all, Manat, hello, good to hear from you. So the way that the United States functions as a business sort of ecosystem is that companies generally do not retrain people. What happens in America, unlike Europe, for example, is companies fire people they don't want and they hire people with the skills they do want, and they sort of expect the people they've fired to go and reskill themselves in their own, like pay for it themselves, basically, right? The company doesn't pay to reskill you. You have to pay to reskill yourself. And I think that, first of all, I think that the reason that he did that was for media attention. So I think there's a certain element of like publicity involved in it. I think on the DL, they might go and discover that maybe like getting rid of 40% hasn't really worked that well. But I do think that it is true that companies are going to no longer hire, or they're going to fire people that don't work with AI. Even people who have jobs that, that they're going to do stack ranking, and the people who don't use AI are going to be dropped off the bottom, right? Because they're not going to be productive enough. AI really makes you more productive. And I think that they're going to hire people who do use AI. So I think the job descriptions are going to change a lot. And people who are in the old dinosaurs who are not going to change and adapt and learn AI are going to get fired. And then they're going to expect, because, hey, welcome to America, they're going to expect to pay for their own retraining. And some of them won't retrain, right? That's just the way it is. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. So yeah, so I guess get in front of it. It's much nicer to be in front of it than it is to be behind it, right? So how important, somebody says, do you think more people will have to learn to code as opposed to vibe coding? That's a great question. I think that, oh no, so hello, Abby. I think that the first domain that AI has really chosen to attack is coding. And that's because the people who are creating the AI need to do that to have the AI created faster. But I think what we're going to see is that AI will, just like it's done for coding, will extend itself into other domains, into domains of specific skills. And code is one of those skills, and there are going to be other skills. So I think code is just the first of many. Now, do you think more people will have to learn to code as opposed to vibe code? That's a great question. No, I think I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say no. I think that vibe coding for most people is going to be enough, because vibe coding is going to get better. And you maybe don't have the skills to create your own like workflows and stuff, or other people will do it for you and you can be able to buy them. And I think that it's dramatically decreased the price of software. And I think that's good, because there's always been a humongous shortage of software in the world. There's always, the demand for software has always massively outstripped the supply of software. And I think this is sort of somewhat restoring the balance. But I think, honestly, I got to tell you, like the code that AI generates, I don't read it all. I check it into GitHub without having read it all. I sort of check it works. So I'm guilty of that as well. So Amanda, you said skill you mentioned. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Skill you mentioned is like that kind of skill. Yes. A skill you mentioned is like the instructions. These things are very annoyingly called skills, which are these sort of markdown instruction specific things that they can follow. And you can, if you don't have the ability to write a coding Claude skill, you can get somebody to do it for you, and then you'll be able to vibe code sufficiently well. And I also think a lot of these, like I don't think they're up to creating large tasks, but AI can do a pretty decent job of anything that a person can do in an hour or less. Okay. Jalpan, thank you. Where do you see the biggest risk of PMs over relying on AI outputs instead of judgment? AI is very good at doing things. It's very bad at knowing what to do. I do not think AI should ever replace using your good judgment to know what you should be doing, and to use your judgment to know, like, who should you be talking to, those kinds of things, right? Where are the problems? AI can't see into your head, or at least not yet. And I think that you should, never put something in front of a customer that you haven't looked at. Don't necessarily rely on AI to do that automatically. And I think there's always going to be a need for you to have those customer conversations, and there's always going to be a need for you to be the decision maker, which is why I thought leadership matters so much. At least one of the reasons.
Any other questions before we all sign off?
I have one question. Can I
Sure, go
ask?
for it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you,
like,
Mohammed.
how if we can use AI? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. How AI can be used to overcome like bottlenecks on assembly line, and at the same point of time, how can we keep the quality standards up? Because as I can see, many of the manufacturing plants and other things are also integrating AI. But can it 100% replace humans at the initial or downwind level?
So, so AI in production and AI in robotics are two very big fields of AI. I mean, that's actually one of the things I teach in my course. We work with embedded systems, which are related to those production operations. That's a very difficult question to answer in the time we have allotted. So I do think AI has a role there. I think actually that there is you mentioned a concern about a decline in quality. I actually think there is going to be a decline in quality, because we've seen that in other industries where, for example, like clothing, like all our clothing is kind of crappy today, but that's because it's so much cheaper to produce automated processes to produce kind of crappy clothing that now the price difference between good stuff and cheap crap kind of becomes bigger and bigger. I think that is a problem. I think you've identified a problem. Without getting really into detail, I have no meaningful way of answering that in the time that we have. I'm sorry.
It's absolutely fine.
Okay. So it says here, Abhi says, I can tell, Chat or Claude to triple check its results. Gaslighting does wonders. Yeah. I'm not sure triple check works. What I do is I say clear. You clear the context window, start a new chat, and then get it to go at it. We haven't talked about things like slash commands and all those other things that make you much more productive at using AI.
Thank you, Dr. Swart, for this great session. Just a quick question here about the importance of AI. We said in the beginning that it is improving so much lately, like in the last 2 years in your example. How fast do you think we're gonna get into that learning AI and how to use AI is gonna be more important than learning even the basic like the basic skills of, like, for example, like learning how to use AI to generate a code is going to be more important than learning how to read the code itself and how to code?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, I think we're in some sense approaching that point, a point already. I mean, I do think that I think one of the big futures of AI is going to be, instead of having these large general systems of AI, which are very expensive. I mean, I know they're giving them away virtually for free now, but trust me, Anthropic aren't going to be charging $100 a month for AI for very much longer. They've got a lot of investment and they need to get it back, and they have a plan to do that. So I think that AI is going to become much, much more expensive, and that means that it's going to become much more specialized. And the kinds of AI that people are going to be using are smaller models that are distilled, if you like, from larger models that are domain specific. They can often be much better, actually, than a large general AI. So I think we're going to see that. But as to your question of, do we have, like, to what point is it going to be more important to do those things? I mean, I don't know. I still think you need to have discernment, right? You need to be able to have judgment, and I don't think that's ever really going to go away. But I do think that the quality of the output is going to increase. I mean, that's sort of almost a philosophical question. Should that? I mean, maybe that can happen, but should it? And I think the answer is probably no. We should not get to that point. Should also tell you I have some sort of let's say unconventional views on the philosophy of AI. So take that with a pinch of salt.
All right.
Great, thank you.
So we are over time. Do we have any more questions, any more pressing questions before we all sign off? Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone for joining and for your questions and participation. This has been great. This session has been brought to you by the Engineering Management Program. If you would like more information on the program, or if you know someone who would benefit from this program, please reach out to either myself or my colleague, Diana. I am putting my email in the chat there. We are continuing our Lunch and Learn series for the spring semester, so please follow us on LinkedIn at Cornell Engineering Management and keep an eye out for when sessions are announced. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your Friday.
Thanks, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Professor. Thanks, Alexis.
Thanks.